My daughter-in-law looked me directly in the eye across that long catered table and said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "This is a family dinner for people who actually belong here, and frankly, Mum, you don't." The conversation around us stopped. Forks went still. My son Gerald just stared at his wine glass like it had suddenly become the most interesting thing in the room. I sat there in my good cardigan, the blue one I'd been saving, holding my breath, and then, very quietly, I reached into my bag, found my phone, and sent one text message to a woman named Constance Webb. I should explain who I am before I explain who I became that night. My name is Josephine. Most people call me Jo. I am 67 years old, and I live in a small house in Guelph, Ontario. The same house where I raised my son Gerald and my daughter Nora for 23 years. The garden out front still has the rosebush my husband, Arthur, planted the spring before he got sick. I haven't had the heart to move it, even though it grows sideways now and blocks part of the front step. Some things you just leave because moving them feels like losing something twice. Arthur died 11 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. Fast and cruel, the way that particular disease always is. He was 58. We had just started talking about retiring somewhere quiet near the water, maybe Tobermory, maybe somewhere along the Bruce Peninsula. We never got there. After he passed, I kept the house and I kept busy. I volunteered at the literacy program at the public library on Tuesday mornings. I helped organize the annual fundraiser at St. Andrew's Presbyterian every October. I took a watercolor class on Thursday afternoons that I was genuinely terrible at and continued attending anyway because the instructor, a patient man named Douglas, never once made me feel embarrassed about it. Life was small and it was mine, and for the most part, it was enough. Gerald called me every Sunday for years. He lived in Toronto by then, working in commercial real estate development. He had done well for himself, genuinely well, and I was proud of him in the way a mother is proud when she watches something she built from nothing grow into something she barely recognizes, but loves completely. Anyway, then he married Renata. I want to be fair here because fairness matters to me more than being right. Renata is not a bad person. She is ambitious and particular, and she has very specific ideas about how things should look and who should be in which room at what kind of occasion. She grew up wealthy in Oakville. Her parents belonged to a country club. Her idea of a casual dinner is what most people would consider a formal event. I understood early on that I confused her slightly. I didn't fit neatly into the life she was building around my son. The first time I visited their condo in Liberty Village, Renata had clearly prepared the guest room with care. Fresh flowers, good towels, everything arranged just so. But when I accidentally spilled tea on the marble countertop that first morning and immediately reached for the dishcloth to clean it up myself the way any person would, she took the cloth from my hand and wiped it again herself. Quietly, without saying anything, just making sure it was done correctly. I never forgot that. Over the following 2 years, the Sunday calls from Gerald became shorter, then less frequent. Then I would sometimes call him, and his voicemail would answer, and 3 days would pass before he called back. When we did talk, there was often a kind of careful politeness between us that had never been there before, like we were both measuring our words before releasing them. My granddaughter Lily noticed before I admitted it to myself. Lily is Gerald and Renata's daughter, 8 years old, sharp as anything, and kind in the way that some children simply are born kind, without effort or performance. She used to call me on her small tablet every few evenings to show me things. A drawing she had done, a rock she found, a dance she had learned. She always called when Renata was putting her younger brother down for his nap. I noticed the timing, but I never mentioned it. About 3 weeks before everything happened, Gerald called to invite me to dinner. An important dinner, he said, a firm milestone event. His development company had just closed a significant partnership with a property group out of Vancouver, and they were celebrating with a small private dinner at a restaurant in Yorkville. Partners, investors, Renata's parents would be there. I want you to understand what that invitation meant to me. I had not been included in anything connected to Gerald's professional life in nearly 4 years. I thought he was reaching back toward me. I thought something had shifted. I said yes before he finished the sentence. That week I took my good coat to the dry cleaner on Stone Road. I polished my black heels myself at the kitchen table using an old cloth. I had my hair done at the salon where I'd been going since 1998, a small place on Speedvale, run by a woman named Carol, who has cut my hair through 3 funerals and 2 knee operations, and never once charged me full price during difficult months. Carol asked where I was going. I told her my son's work dinner in Toronto. She smiled and said, "He's lucky to have you coming." I believed her. The drive from Guelph to Toronto took just over an hour. I parked at the restaurant because the neighborhood parking fee was $30, and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at the entrance before going in. The kind of restaurant you have to look at before you enter. Dark stone exterior, brushed brass hardware on the door, no menu in the window because the clientele already knows. Inside, the maitre smiled the practiced smile of someone trained to make everyone feel welcome, while also communicating very precisely who belongs. He checked the reservation. His expression shifted slightly, in the way that told me exactly which private room was mine to be assessed by. And he led me through the main dining room, where every table seemed to be occupied by people wearing their confidence like a second jacket. Gerald was already there with Renata and a group of 8 or 10 people I didn't know. When he saw me, he stood. The way you stand when someone you are not entirely sure fits the occasion walks into a room you care about deeply. "Mum." He kissed my cheek. "You made it." "Of course I made it," I said. "It's not that far." Renata approached in a dark green dress, her hair perfectly smooth. She kissed the air near my ear. "Josephine, we weren't sure the drive would be manageable for you." I told her the drive was fine. The group included Renata's parents. Her father, Clifford, a tall man with the handshake of someone who wants you to register his importance immediately, and her mother, Sylvia, who smiled at me with the kind of warmth that doesn't quite reach the corners of the eyes. There were 2 partners from the Vancouver firm and their spouses, and a man named Lawrence Rowe, who was introduced to me as the firm's principal financial advisor, a detail I filed away quietly. I was seated at the far end of the table. Not the head, not the middle, the end, near Sylvia and the wife of one of the Vancouver partners, a placement that communicated something without saying it directly. I understood. Renata had organized the seating. I was near the decorative end of the evening. At first the conversation flowed around me pleasantly enough. I asked questions, I listened. I laughed at the right moments. The Vancouver partners were genuinely interesting people. One of them had grown up in Halifax, and we talked briefly about the East Coast and what the winters were like. And he seemed grateful for a normal conversation. I thought for a while that the evening might simply pass without incident. Then Clifford, Renata's father, looked down the table toward me and said with the jovial confidence of a man who has never once doubted his standing in any room, "So, Gerald tells us you keep yourself busy with volunteer work." The way he said volunteer work managed to be simultaneously polite and diminishing. The way some people say it, as though the absence of a salary makes the activity a hobby rather than a contribution. I told him yes, I worked with adult literacy learners and had been doing so for 9 years. "That's very sweet," Sylvia said. I smiled. I kept eating, but I could see Renata watching me from across the table. Watching the way I held my fork, the way I reached for the bread, the way I laughed too loudly at something, the Halifax man said. Assessing. She had been assessing me since the moment I arrived. The main course arrived. I was doing fine. I was genuinely enjoying the salmon when the conversation shifted to Gerald's new project, a luxury residential development in Etobicoke. Significant investment, multi-year timeline. Gerald was speaking with obvious pride, and I felt it too, listening to him. That pride that is specific to mothers who watched their children become something. Then Clifford said, "You must be proud, Joe." Gerald pulled himself up completely on his own, from very humble beginnings. He said, humble the way people say it when they mean something else. Gerald laughed awkwardly. "Dad always worked hard," he said, gesturing vaguely toward me. We managed. 2 words that erased 20 years. The nights I worked the front desk at a Holiday Inn on the 401 from 11 to 7, so that Arthur's shifts at the plant wouldn't be our only income. The years I drove Gerald to hockey at 5:30 in the morning, because he had the talent for it, and we were not going to let the fact of money determine whether he could pursue something he loved. The tuition I paid for his first 2 years at Ryerson by cashing in a small insurance policy I'd been contributing to since he was born. Arthur and I had agreed. We would never tell him about that. We didn't want him to feel the weight of it. We wanted him to feel like his achievement was his own. We managed. I set my fork down quietly. I didn't say anything yet. I wasn't sure I was going to. Then Renata, from across the table, in a voice calibrated to carry just far enough without being obvious about it, said, "Gerald has really built something remarkable. Especially considering." She paused, just long enough. The kind of neighborhood he started from. The Vancouver partner's wife looked at her soup. Lawrence Rowe, the financial advisor, shifted in his seat. Gerald looked at his plate, and then Renata looked directly at me and completed the sentence she had been building all evening. "This is really a dinner for the people who helped make this happen, and I think everyone here has contributed in some meaningful way." The pause again. "It's just. Josephine, you must understand, this is a professional gathering. You're lovely to have come, but I'm not sure this is quite your setting." The table went quiet, the way rooms go quiet when something has been said that cannot be unsaid. Lily's face appeared in my mind at that moment. The way she had called me 3 days before from her tablet, in that whispered voice. "Grandma," she had said, "are you really coming to Dad's dinner?" I had told her yes. She had gone quiet for a moment in the way children go quiet when they know something they can't explain to adults yet. "Just be yourself," she'd finally said. "Okay, just be yourself, Grandma." I picked up my napkin from my lap and folded it with some care. I put it beside my plate. I opened my bag and found my phone, and I sent a text message to Constance Webb. 3 words. She'd been expecting them for a while, as it turned out. Then I placed my phone face down on the table, and I looked at Renata calmly. "Thank you for having me," I said. I meant it without sarcasm. The salmon was wonderful. I was aware of Gerald watching me. He hadn't defended me. I want to be honest about that. Not with anger, with grief, because I had not truly let myself understand, until that moment, how far the distance between us had grown. I excused myself from the table to use the restroom. When I returned, the conversation had resumed, though with a quality to it like something underneath had shifted slightly. I sat back down. I poured myself water from the carafe. I stayed. 10 minutes later, a woman in a charcoal blazer walked into the private dining room with the kind of quiet authority that immediately reorganizes the hierarchy of any space she enters. She was perhaps 55, silver-haired, unhurried. The restaurant manager practically materialized at her elbow. Her name was Constance Webb. She was the senior managing partner of Webb Caldwell Property Holdings, which was, as it happened, the Vancouver firm whose partnership Gerald's company had just spent 8 months and considerable legal fees securing. I had known Constance for 16 years. She found me at the end of the table, and something in her face relaxed the way a person's face relaxes when they find the one person in a room they actually came to see. "Joe," she said warmly. She leaned down and embraced me with the genuine ease of someone I had once spent 3 weeks with organizing a housing advocacy project in 2008 in a church basement in Hamilton, back when Constance was still building her company, and I was on the board of a nonprofit called Threshold Housing that no one important had paid much attention to yet. The table had gone very quiet again. Gerald was staring. Renata's expression had changed in a way she was clearly working to control. "I got your message," Constance said, settling into a chair one of the servers instantly produced. She looked around the table with a smile and then back at me. "I didn't know you were going to be here tonight." "Neither did I quite," I said. She laughed. Then she looked at Gerald. "Your mother," she said, "is one of the most remarkable people I know. I hope you understand that." Gerald opened his mouth and closed it. Clifford had the look of a man recalibrating very rapidly. Renata said carefully, "How do you two know each other?" "It's a fair question." I'll explain it the way I explained it that evening, as briefly as I could. In the early 2000s, Threshold Housing was a small nonprofit trying to develop transitional housing solutions in southern Ontario. Arthur and I had become involved through the church, initially just fundraising. Then I joined the board. Over several years, we worked with a coalition of community groups, local government contacts, private donors, and a handful of early-stage investors who believed the work mattered. Constance Webb was one of those investors. At the time, she had a mid-sized property development firm and a reputation for taking on projects that other developers considered financially risky but socially necessary. We worked together closely for 3 years. When Threshold Housing eventually merged with a larger provincial housing body, and I stepped off the board, Constance and I stayed in touch. She sent a card when Arthur died. I sent one when her father passed the following spring. The kind of friendship that is not frequent but is deep and carries weight. What I had not told Gerald, what Arthur and I had agreed, long ago, not to make into a story about ourselves, was that during a critical funding period for a Threshold project in 2009, I had personally guaranteed a bridge loan using the equity in our Guelph house. Arthur had agreed. The project was in danger of collapsing without it. We never told anyone, including our children, because we didn't want the decision treated as a sacrifice, rather than a choice we made freely, because we believed in the work. That project was one of the formative experiences Constance Webb cited publicly, years later, as the reason she began reorienting her firm toward mixed-income residential development. It influenced the company philosophy that eventually grew into Webb Caldwell Property Holdings. The firm my son had just signed a multi-million-dollar partnership agreement with. I had not organized this. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I had not come to this dinner into an ending of this to emerge. I had come because my son had invited me, and I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that we were finding our way back to each other. But Constance was here because she had recognized the restaurant in Gerald's event announcement, which she'd seen forwarded through a mutual contact, and had decided to stop by and congratulate him in person. She had no idea I was coming. When she sat down and heard what had happened earlier that evening, from me quietly, not dramatically, her expression did something I had not expected. She looked sad. Then she looked at Gerald. "Your mother," she said, "personally took financial risk for a project that shaped how I think about development. If my company exists the way it does today, she is part of the reason." She said it simply, without theater. "I thought you should know that." The silence that followed was the kind you feel in your chest. Gerald was looking at me in a way I hadn't seen from him in years. Not with embarrassment, with something that was beginning slowly to resemble recognition. Renata had set her fork down. Her father Clifford was very carefully not speaking. Lawrence Rowe, the financial advisor, had produced a small notebook from somewhere and was very deliberately not writing in it. "Renata," Gerald said. His voice was different. Quieter than before, but not uncertain. "What you said earlier, Gerald." Renata's voice was controlled. "No." He put his hand flat on the table. "No, I should have said something when you said it." The table was listening now. The Vancouver partners, Sylvia, Clifford, everyone. Gerald looked at me. "Mum, I'm sorry. It wasn't enough. I want to be honest about that too." 2 words across a dinner table do not erase 3 years of Sundays where my son had slowly been choosing a version of himself that had less and less room for me. But it was a beginning. Something real and unprepared. And I had not heard my son's unguarded voice in a very long time. Constance stayed for another hour. She talked about the new project with Gerald's firm, asked genuine questions, steered the conversation with the skill of someone who has been in many difficult rooms and knows how to leave them better than she found them. Before she left, she touched my hand. "Tea soon." "Tea soon," she said. "You still owe me a rematch at cribbage." "You've won 4 games in a row," I said. "I don't think rematch is the word you're looking for." She laughed and left, and the dinner resumed, altered in ways I couldn't fully measure. I drove back to Guelph that night with the radio on low, the highway dark and empty the way it gets after midnight in January. I didn't cry until I turned off the 401 and started on the familiar streets toward home. Not from sadness exactly, more from the strange exhaustion of carrying something for a long time, and then being, unexpectedly, allowed to set it down for a moment. Gerald called the next morning, early. Earlier than he had called on a Sunday in at least 2 years. "Mum, Gerald." A pause. The kind I recognized as him arranging something difficult into language. "I don't know how I let it get like this," he said. I waited. "With Renata, she didn't mean it to be cruel. She has this way of." He stopped. "That's not an excuse." "No," I said gently. "It isn't. Did you know Constance Webb would be there?" "No," I told him. I sent her a text because I needed a moment to compose myself, and she was the first person I thought to contact. I didn't plan anything. Another silence. The loan, he said. The house. I didn't know. Your father and I didn't want you to. Why? I thought about how to answer that for a moment. Because we wanted your achievements to be yours, I said. And because some choices a person makes aren't about being repaid. They're just choices. Gerald was quiet for a long time after that. Long enough that I started worrying the call had dropped. I've been ashamed, he finally said. Not of you. Of where we came from. Of what it looked like. I know, I said. It wasn't rational. No. But it was real. He exhaled. Renata and I have been. Things have been difficult. She has these expectations, and I think somewhere I started trying to meet them by. He stopped again. I made you smaller, so I could feel bigger. I held the phone and looked out at the rosebush through the kitchen window, leaning sideways the way it always does in January. You were never small, I said. I know that, now. You knew it before. You just forgot. He didn't say anything for a while, and I didn't need him to. Renata's called 2 days later. That surprised me more than Constance's appearance at the restaurant had. She was formal at first, careful, the way she always is. But partway through the conversation something shifted and she said, I've been embarrassed by my own family before, you know, in different ways. I think I put that somewhere it didn't belong. I didn't absolve her immediately. That would have been dishonest. But I told her I appreciated the call and that I thought she was more self-aware than she often let herself appear. That landed differently than she expected. I heard it in the silence. Lily called that evening at her usual time, from the tablet, in the careful quiet of her brother's nap. Grandma, was dinner okay? I thought about it for a moment. It was complicated, I said. But you're okay? I'm okay. She seemed to consider this. Dad seemed different today, she said. He had breakfast with us. Like, sat down and actually ate. That meant something. I knew from things Lily had mentioned over the past year that Gerald often ate standing up in the kitchen before work, already thinking about something else. Sitting down, actually present. Small the way real changes often begin. I'm glad, I said. Me too, said Lily. It has been 5 months now since that dinner in Yorkville. Things have not resolved themselves in the clean arc that stories sometimes suggest. Gerald and Renata are in couples counseling, which they told me together on a Sunday phone call in February, and which I privately think is the first genuinely honest thing they have done as a couple in some time. Gerald has been calling on Sundays again. Not every Sunday, but more. And when he calls, he asks me things about my week the way he used to, with actual curiosity about the answer. Last month, he drove out to Guelph on a Wednesday. Unannounced, which is something he would never have done 2 years ago. He brought good coffee from a place in Toronto he thought I would like. We sat at my kitchen table and I told him about the literacy program and a learner I'd been working with, a man named Patrick who had arrived from Eritrea 3 years ago and had just read his first full English chapter book to his daughter. Gerald listened the way you can only listen when you've recently stopped performing. Before he left, he stood in the front garden for a moment looking at Arthur's rosebush. It always grows like that, he said. Since about 2016, I said. I keep meaning to stake it properly. He stood there looking at it. Then he said, I'll come back in the spring and help you fix it. If you want, I said I would want that very much. We had tea on my porch in April. Gerald and Renata and Lily and her little brother Jack, who is 4 and deeply committed to investigating everything in my garden with a stick. The afternoon was cool and bright the way Ontario springs are when they finally mean it. Renata brought a lemon loaf from a bakery in Oakville. Gerald staked the rose bush with a wooden dowel and some garden twine while Lily supervised. It didn't look perfect. It still leaned a little. But it was standing in the direction of the light, which is maybe all you can ask of anything that has been growing sideways for a while. At some point, Gerald came to sit beside me, while Lily chased Jack around the yard, and Renata refilled the cups from the pot I'd left on the small table. He looked out at the garden for a while without speaking. Then he said quietly, I forgot that this was the richest place I grew up in. I looked at him. Not because of money, he said. Just this. He gestured vaguely at the yard, the rosebush, the 2 children, the ordinary April light. This was always enough. I forgot that it was enough. I didn't say anything right away because it didn't need anything added to it. A mother knows when to let the words settle. Lily's laughter carried across the yard. Jack had found something remarkable with his stick. Renata was smiling at them with an ease I hadn't seen from her before, unguarded and unhurried. The coffee was warm and the rosebush was staked, and the afternoon was very quiet. And for the first time in a long time, my family felt like it was in the same room.